Speaking of podcasts, I noticed that one of your service offerings is literally like helping companies get podcasts off the ground, industry podcasts off the ground. Tell me a little bit more about why you think companies running ABM programs should do a podcast and what's stopping more companies from doing it.
Two core reasons. So again, as we think about this 4D framework, one of the core pillars is destination. So like, what are you pointing people to? And so many people struggle with creating that new content. They find themselves struggling to write. They find themselves struggling to be on camera. They find themselves like there's 1,000 reasons that they struggle with content. And what I personally love about podcasting is your first 13 episodes are probably going to be terrible. And I mean that with all kindness. If you want to go listen to my first podcast, it's called The Marketing Ladder. First 13 episodes were awful. Like I just was horrible as a host. It's horrible as a guest. And I had to do quite a few guesting opportunities to get half decent at being a guest. But once you've done it and you've kind of gotten over the hump and you get used to seeing yourself, and it's actually easier now that we've been largely living in a remote world. You're kind of used to seeing yourself on a camera now. So once you've gotten over that hump, you can then just create a ton of content relatively easily through podcasting. Because if we think about how do we create written content, we generally interview a subject matter expert on a specific topic. Sounds like a podcast. So we take the interview, and then depending on how structured we want to actually be with the content, you could actually do keyword research on the front end and structure the questions that you ask to align with H2 headings or H3 headings. And then you actually just ask questions that then become the outline of your podcast. You just literally copy and paste over the transcript. You clean up the transcript a little bit, which you could actually probably do largely through, not probably, you can do it largely through ChatGPT. You literally just feed it a section and say like, can you reformat this as a blog? Takes you about 15, 20 minutes to get it through ChatGPT that way, which again, for free. And then you've got a blog that's 70% of the way there. So again, it's something that as a podcast, if you create and if you use it appropriately, it becomes video content, becomes long form video, short form, long form, social content that can be posted pretty easily in, again, a short form way. It becomes long form blog content, and you get a podcast. You can turn it into a newsletter. My podcast is largely a newsletter. So it becomes, if you're familiar with the hub and spoke model, it becomes the hub that then fills in all the rest of your content pieces. So one, from a content perspective and actually filling up your content inventory relatively quickly, that's why I like podcasting. The second thing is relationship components. So this came from a book called Content-Based Networking. There's a guy named James Carberry, and he runs the agency Sweetfish. James ran a podcast and was trying to get guests on the show, and he recognized, he was trying to sell his stuff. Oh, like 8 out of 10 people say yes to joining a podcast. But if I try to just do cold outbound, I'm lucky if I get a 5% conversion rate. So again, with podcasting, and there's some nuance to this, like you need to ask people that are at a similar level to you. And forgive me for being so blunt, but like, I'm probably not going to get Alex Hermosi on my podcast. He is exponentially at a higher level than I am. But I could probably get somebody like Chris Walker. I've gotten Chris Walker on my podcast. He is at a higher level, but not like so high up that he's unattainable. And also we're same industry. So again, there are those, he would be a reach guest in my opinion. But still, you can interview people, and the likelihood that they say yes is generally speaking about 80%. Now, how this turns into account-based play is you just invite your target accounts onto a show. So again, let's say I wanted to break into a specific account, and I'm just doing this outreach all over and over and over again. Ballpark, if I'm just doing cold outreach, I'm going to get in the ballpark of a 3 to 5% conversion rate. If I really crush it and I'm super nuanced and I have a great trigger, I could get a 10% conversion rate from a prospecting perspective. Whereas if I really just want to build a relationship, I can ask just about anybody onto a show. And with an 80% confidence level, they'll say yes. And especially, and forgive me for saying it this bluntly, but like for someone like me that's been very active on social in my industry, very publicly for 3 or 4 years at this point, the likelihood that somebody says yes to me is pretty high. Not because I've been around long enough and people know that I exist generally. Maybe they're familiar, but the likelihood that somebody says yes to me is pretty solidly yes. So again, from a new business development perspective, if you got to think through how do I best use my time, the opportunity to get a guaranteed yes with the right fit buyer, to talk about the problems that they're experiencing through the podcast that you're interviewing them on, and to build just a great relationship is one of the best ways to do it. And then the likelihood that they hop on a call with you later is exponentially greater because you've provided and actually led with value, which value is a bit of a loose word for most people. But if you invite someone on, you promote them, you let them share their expertise that is leading with value, they will be more likely to actually hop on a call with you after, because you build a relationship led with value versus, hey, here's a cold pitch.
Absolutely. And quite honestly, like, we just started our podcast. We're probably like 8 episodes in, and this is quite literally the playbook. This interview started as a blog post, and we're like, I want an expert to actually contribute to this blog post. Like, who's out there who knows ABM really well? And like, lo and behold, like, you pop up on LinkedIn a ton for ABM, and here we are. So can confirm that it definitely works. People are exponentially more likely to want to talk about themselves, talk about like what they care about, than just have somebody kind of like pitch slap them on LinkedIn. And they're just like, yeah, you and 100 other vendors who reached out to me this morning.